The rain hadn't started yet, but the air already smelled like metal and danger. Thick storm clouds rolled over the Texas hills, turning the sky the color of bruised steel. I stood at the edge of the dam, boots sinking into wet clay, staring down at the water that used to feed my grandfather's land. My hand rested on the cold iron lever, rusted, old, but still powerful enough to change everything. Lightning flashed somewhere far off, and for a moment the entire valley lit up. That's when the thought hit me again, sharp and clear as thunder. They thought they could steal my family's land while I was overseas. They forgot who built the dam. They forgot who I am. I took a slow breath, the kind that burns on the way out. Behind me, the wind howled through the cracked boards of the old barn, carrying with it the smell of dust, rain, and memory. Pops used to say a storm could wash away lies if you let it. Tonight, I was counting on it. Everything that led to this moment started with one letter. It arrived 2 weeks after I got back from deployment. A plain white envelope, no return address, just a cheap printed label that said HOA Notice. I didn't even know what HOA meant back then. I'd been gone for 3 years, serving with the Army Corps of Engineers overseas, fixing flood systems in deserts that hadn't seen rain in decades. I came home expecting peace. Instead, I walked into a war I didn't see coming. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm 34 years old, third-generation Texan, and the last living Morrison on this land. My grandfather, who everyone called Pops, built this dam in 1978 with his bare hands, a pickup truck, and a prayer. Back then, the drought was so bad the cattle were dying standing up, their ribs showing through their hides. Pops wanted to save his neighbors, not just himself. So he spent months building a reservoir to hold back rainwater and channel it downstream for the whole valley. When the first storm finally came, people said it was like watching a miracle flow through the desert. I was just a kid then, too young to understand what it meant to build something that lasts longer than you do. But I remember the look in his eyes when the water first poured through that spillway. Pride, relief, purpose. He told me, "Jake, this land remembers who takes care of it. You take care of the land, it'll take care of you." I didn't realize then that he was giving me the rule that would define the rest of my life. Pops passed away while I was deployed. He was 86, still stubborn, still sharp. I got the call in a sandstorm, radio crackling, my sergeant holding out a folded note from the Red Cross. I remember standing there, staring at my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Pops was gone. When I finally came home 6 months later, the house was quiet. His boots were still by the door, hat still hanging on the wall. The dam still stood, but something about it felt different, like it was waiting for someone to remember what it was built for. The first sign of trouble came the day after I got back. I drove out to check the pastures, expecting to see tall grass and the old irrigation lines Pop set up decades ago. Instead, I found gravel paths, chain-link fences, and signs that read, "Future site of Willowbrook Estates." I thought it was a joke. My family's land wasn't for sale, never had been. But when I followed the fence line, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Half the creek was gone, rerouted through shiny new drainage pipes leading straight into a construction site. That's when I saw her. A woman in a white blouse and oversized sunglasses stood by the fence, clipboard in hand, talking to a man in a hard hat. She noticed me watching and gave a little wave. That kind of wave people give when they think they own the air you're breathing. "You must be the Morrison boy," she said. "Welcome home. I'm Maggie Thornwell, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association." The way she said it, you'd think she was the mayor of Texas. I asked what she was doing on my property, and she laughed like I'd just told a joke. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "this land's part of the new community zone now. We're improving safety and increasing property values." That's when I noticed the stakes in the ground, each one marked with bright orange flags. They ran right through the old Morrison pasture, down to the edge of the creek. My creek, Pops's creek. I told her she was mistaken, that this was private land, and she smiled again, tight, polite, deadly. "Well, the paperwork says otherwise," she said. "But you're welcome to attend the next HOA meeting if you'd like to discuss it." HOA. 3 letters that meant nothing to me then, but would come to define the next year of my life. I didn't know it yet, but I'd just met the devil of Willowbrook Estates, and she'd just found her new obsession. I spent that night sitting in Pops's old chair, staring at the dam through the rain. The house creaked with every gust of wind, like it was whispering secrets I hadn't learned yet. I pulled out the old box of land deeds and maps from under the bed. Every document had the Morrison name on it. Every inch of soil, every foot of water was ours. Pops had left it all in order, just like he always did. But the signatures on Maggie's fence permits told a different story. Someone had forged my grandfather's name after he died. I could have ignored it. Could have let it go. But I couldn't shake his words. This land remembers who takes care of it. And right then, I knew I couldn't let it forget. The next morning, I drove into town to talk to the county clerk. She was a kind old woman with glasses that sat too low on her nose. When I showed her the papers, she frowned and said, "These permits ain't right. Whoever filed these did it under corporate zoning, not residential." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning someone paid to push it through without review." She slid a folder toward me, showing the name Thornwell Development Group, printed in bold letters. The same last name as the HOA president. When I walked out of that office, I knew exactly what kind of game they were playing. Maggie wasn't protecting a neighborhood. She was expanding her empire. And my land was just her next pawn. I drove back to the ranch and parked near the dam. The sun was setting, turning the water blood red. I remembered Pop standing right here 30 years ago saying, "A dam ain't just concrete, Jake, it's a promise. You build it to hold back what shouldn't be lost." Well, I'd lost enough already. My grandfather. My peace, my home. I wasn't about to lose the land, too. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer and the old family dog asleep at my feet. The sound of crickets filled the air, broken only by the faint hum of construction equipment in the distance. I could see the glow of floodlights over the hill where they were already pouring foundations. They were building fast, too fast. That meant they knew I'd caught on. I pulled out my phone, opened the contact list, and scrolled until I found the name I hadn't called in years, Tony Riggs. Old Army buddy, now working with the EPA. If anyone knew how to dig through the kind of bureaucratic mess Maggie was hiding behind, it was him. I didn't even hesitate. I hit dial. He answered on the second ring. "Jake? Damn, it's been forever." "Yeah," I said. "Listen, I've got a situation down here. Someone's diverting a creek without federal clearance. Think you can help me prove it?" Tony paused for a second, then said, "Send me everything you've got. If they touched a federally mapped waterway, they're screwed." That was all I needed to hear. As I hung up, lightning flashed again over the horizon. I could smell the rain coming, heavy and mean. I looked out at the dam one last time, water glinting under the dark sky, and felt a slow smile spread across my face. They thought they could scare me with letters and threats. They thought they could bury me under rules. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. They weren't just messing with some ex-soldier trying to hold on to his grandfather's land. They were messing with a man who understood water, time, and pressure. And I was about to teach them all three. So I took another drink, set the empty bottle on the railing, and whispered to the storm. "Let's see who breaks first. Because out here in Texas, you don't win by shouting. You win by waiting for the rain and knowing exactly when to open the floodgate." The morning after that storm felt heavier than any morning I could remember. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes you feel like the whole world's holding its breath. I brewed a pot of coffee, black as tar, and sat at Pops's old kitchen table, the same table he built with his hands 50 years ago, the same one I used to crawl under when thunderstorms scared me. I kept staring at the land out the window, that wide Texas horizon stretching out forever. But it didn't look the same anymore. I used to see home. Now I saw a battlefield. The letter from the HOA lay open beside me, the words sharp and smug like they'd been written by someone who'd never worked a real day in their life. Violation, unregistered vehicle on private property. They meant the old truck. Pops's truck. A 1972 Ford F-100, faded blue, rust on the hood, the kind of thing that's worth nothing to anyone but the man who drove it. I used to sit on his lap steering that truck down the dirt road, him laughing while chewing on a piece of straw. They wanted to tow it, said it was a blight on the community image. Community image. Those two words made my blood boil. They'd paved over history and called it progress. I spent most of that morning walking the property line, boots sinking into soft ground from the rain. The creek was still swollen, water rushing fast and angry, the sound echoing off the hills. That creek had fed this land since before I was born. Every rock, every twist in its path was familiar. I could walk it blindfolded and still find my way. Pops always said water remembers. It never forgets where it's supposed to go. And as I followed the current, I saw where Maggie's construction crews had cut through the banks, jagged, raw, and wrong. They'd forced the creek into new trenches lined with cheap concrete and rebar. It looked like surgery done by someone who didn't care if the patient lived or died. I knelt down and scooped a handful of the water, watched it run between my fingers. It was cloudy, full of silt and oil. Pops's dam had kept that water clear for decades. Now it looked sick. It wasn't just about land anymore. They were poisoning something sacred. When I got back to the house, I found an envelope taped to the front door. Inside was a stack of printed community guidelines written by the HOA, all signed at the bottom by one name, Margaret Thornwell, President. Her tone jumped off the page even in black and white. Rules, penalties, threats dressed up as policy. Every line dripped arrogance. Lawn height must not exceed 4 inches. Non-compliant vehicles subject to immediate towing. All residents must submit to HOA inspections upon request. I laughed out loud. The Morrison land had been here before she was born, before her fake subdivisions and her manicured lawns, before any of this existed. The idea that someone like her thought she could walk in and claim authority made my skin crawl. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the lights of the construction site flicker in the distance. Trucks rumbled, men shouted, machinery clanked. They were building in the dark, pushing forward even after the rain. The sound dug into my skull like a drill. Pops's voice echoed in my mind, calm and certain. You don't fight a flood by yelling at the rain. You redirect the flow. So that's what I decided to do. The next morning, I drove into town again, this time with a purpose. The courthouse was quiet, just the sound of old ceiling fans and the shuffle of papers. I went through the records like a man possessed. Property deeds, survey maps, county permits. My name, my grandfather's name, all there, all legal. But right next to them were new documents. Transfers, rezoning approvals, and sale agreements that made no sense. They'd claimed parts of my land as community property. They used the same trick every developer uses. Bury the paperwork in red tape until no one has the energy to dig it back up. But they didn't count on me being the one who came back. As I turned another page, something strange caught my eye. An old stamp from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Faded blue ink. I leaned closer. It was a flood control authorization dated 1978, the year Pops finished the dam. His name was right there, signed in pencil. Under it, a note. Approved for federal water regulation, Morrison family retainment rights in perpetuity. In perpetuity. Forever. That meant the dam and the water it held weren't just mine. They were federally recognized. Not even a county judge could overrule that. My heart started pounding. For the first time since this war began, I felt something other than anger. I felt power. I took photos of every document, every signature, every map. I wanted proof. Undeniable, unbreakable proof. By the time I walked out of that courthouse, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. I could see the construction site glowing in the distance. Maggie was still there, talking to her contractors with that same fake smile, pointing at blueprints like she owned the world. She didn't see me, but I saw her. And in that moment, I made a promise, to Pops, to myself, to the land. They'd built their empire on stolen ground. I was going to take it back, inch by inch, paper by paper, truth by truth. The next few days were a blur of discovery. Every record I found led to another. Hidden zoning documents, fake environmental reports, even bribes listed as community donations. Maggie and her husband had built an entire network of lies. They controlled everything, permits, media coverage, even local officials. But what they didn't control was time. The land doesn't care how much money you throw at it. It only respects patience. Late one night, while sorting through Pops's old files, I found something I'd never noticed before. a faded notebook tucked inside a manila envelope labeled Private. Inside were hand-drawn sketches of the dam, blue ink smeared from age and sweat. Each page was full of notes in Pops's handwriting. Rainfall data, water pressure readings, safety margins. But what caught my eye was one short line scrawled across the last page. If the creek ever runs dry, open the secondary spillway. I froze. There was no mention of that in any official blueprint I'd seen. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out to the dam, rain boots sinking into mud as thunder rumbled again in the distance. When I reached the base of the structure, I saw it, a hidden iron hatch half covered by vines and dirt. I brushed the muck away, and there it was. Emergency floodway access. Pops had built a backup system. A secret one. It hit me all at once. The dam wasn't just a reservoir. It was a weapon, one that could restore the natural creek flow and wash away every inch of Maggie's illegal construction. And it was still functional. The realization left me breathless. I stood there under the storm clouds, water dripping from the brim of my hat, and I swear I could almost hear Pops laughing somewhere. He'd planned for this. Decades ago, he knew someone would try to take what wasn't theirs. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind felt like the land itself was whispering, urging me forward. When I closed my eyes, I saw Maggie's smirk, the fake politeness, the power she wielded over people who didn't know how to fight back. I saw the faces of the neighbors who'd lost their farms when the HOA expanded, good people who couldn't afford lawyers or patience. And then I saw Pops standing by the dam in his old work boots, looking out at the horizon, saying, "The land doesn't belong to us, Jake. We just keep it safe for the next ones." By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about legacy, about memory, about respect. Maggie had turned my family's land into a playground for greed, and I was done asking politely for it back. I walked outside, the morning air sharp with the smell of wet grass. The sky was clearing, streaks of sunlight cutting through the clouds. The dam stood there, solid, eternal. I put my hand on the cold metal of the railing and said out loud, "You built it to protect people? Pops, I'll use it to protect what's left." And for the first time in a long while, I felt calm, because now I knew what I was up against. I knew the rules they'd broken, the lies they'd told, the leverage I had, and most importantly, I knew something Maggie didn't. This land didn't answer to her. It never had. It answered to the water, to the wind, to the Morrison name carved into the foundation of that dam. And as the creek roared below me, stronger and louder than before, I could feel it, something waking up, something ready to fight with me. They'd started this war with paperwork and greed. I was going to finish it with truth, patience, and the one thing they could never control, nature itself. The morning sun hit the land in a way it hadn't in months, bright, relentless, almost mocking. I was standing at the edge of the property when I saw the first of Maggie Thornwell's construction trucks roll in again. Big white pickups with Willowbrook Development logos on the sides. Men in hard hats stepping out like soldiers ready for war. They weren't here to build. They were here to take. I stayed quiet, leaning against Pops's old fence, arms crossed. One of the foremen walked up, clipboard in hand, trying not to make eye contact. "Morning, sir," he said. "Just following orders. HOA's expanding the retention wall. Gotta adjust the creek line for safety compliance." That word again, safety. Every lie in the world starts with safety. I asked him who gave the order, but he didn't answer. Just shrugged, pointed at the clipboard and said, "It's all in writing." Then he turned around and started yelling at his crew to fire up the excavators. Within minutes, the sound of engines filled the air. Metal claws tore into soil that had been undisturbed for decades. Dust rose up like smoke, and with it came something else, rage. I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. The sound of heavy machinery, the men shouting, the way the ground shook as they cut through the creek bed. Pops built that dam to feed this valley, not to destroy it. Watching them tear it apart felt like watching someone rip open a wound that had just started to heal. An hour later, a white SUV pulled up, shiny, spotless, with tinted windows and gold trim. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Maggie Thornwell herself. Every inch of her screamed control, pressed slacks, pearl earrings, hair so tight it looked painful. She smiled like a politician shaking hands before a lie. "Well," she said, her voice as sweet as poison, "if it isn't the famous Mr. Morrison. I was wondering when you'd show up." I didn't move. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Trespassing? Oh, Jake, this is all community property now. We're improving drainage and ensuring the safety of every homeowner. You should be thanking us. After all, this dam of yours is ancient. One heavy rain and it could burst." Her words hit like a slap, but I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I just stared at her. "That dam's been standing longer than your whole subdivision," I said. "It's held through hurricanes, floods, and droughts. It's stronger than you'll ever be." That wiped the smile off her face. For a split second, I saw it, the real Maggie behind the mask, cold, calculating, someone who wasn't used to being told no. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, Jake, I understand you've got sentimental ties to this place, but progress doesn't wait for nostalgia. We've already spoken to the city. This area is part of a community upgrade initiative. You can either cooperate or face the consequences." "Consequences?" I asked. Her smile returned, tight and deliberate. "Let's just say the HOA has ways of making non-compliance very expensive." And with that, she turned and walked back to her car, heels clicking against the gravel like gunshots. I watched her drive away, that white SUV disappearing down the road like a ghost of arrogance. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles popped. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was about domination. She wasn't after property. She was after control, and she'd picked the wrong man to test it on. Over the next few weeks, the harassment began. It started small. Letters in the mail accusing me of violating HOA guidelines, even though my land wasn't part of their jurisdiction. Fake inspection notices claiming my dam was unsafe. Anonymous calls to the county claiming I was storing hazardous materials. Every day, something new. One morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front gate. Immediate action required. Unauthorized structure in violation of community code. Underneath it was a fine for $10,000. No explanation, just a threat. I tore it down and threw it in the dirt. But that was exactly what she wanted. To wear me down piece by piece until I gave up or lost everything. Maggie wasn't doing this alone. Her husband, Rick Thornwell, sat on the local zoning board. He was the kind of man who hid his corruption behind a handshake and a country club smile. Together, they'd built a system that could crush anyone who got in their way. And now, that system had its sights on me. But what they didn't know was that I'd been trained to deal with systems like theirs. I'd seen bureaucracies crumble under the weight of their own lies. I'd seen men like Rick and women like Maggie in every part of the world, people who thought power meant permanence. It doesn't. Power fades, truth doesn't. So I decided to fight back the only way I knew how, by documenting everything. Every conversation, every letter, every illegal trench they dug through my creek. I set up cameras near the dam, motion sensors along the fence, and backed everything up to 3 separate drives. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure the whole world saw it. Still, it wasn't easy. The isolation got to me. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch watching headlights move down the new subdivision roads, families moving into houses built on my stolen soil, kids laughing in yards where my grandfather's cattle once grazed. The sound should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was hollow, false. One night I caught movement near the dam on one of my cameras. 2 figures in hooded jackets were walking along the spillway with flashlights. I grabbed my gun, not to use it, just to feel grounded, and headed down there. When I got close enough, I shouted, "This is private property!" The lights flicked toward me, then vanished. Footsteps pounded through the mud, fading fast. I found their tracks the next morning, boot prints leading straight back toward the construction site. They'd been inspecting the dam, probably looking for a way to declare it unsafe so they could justify tearing it down. That's when I realized something. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was strategy. They weren't trying to scare me, they were laying the groundwork to erase me. 2 days later, I drove to City Hall to file a complaint. I met with a clerk named Wilson, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I told him about the illegal diversion of the creek, the forged zoning documents, the threats. He listened, typing slowly, then sighed and said, "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry, but according to our system, that land is now part of the Willowbrook district." "That's impossible," I said. "My family's owned that property for almost a century." He shrugged. "Sir, if it's in the database, it's official." That's when I saw the Thornwell name in the digital signature field of the zoning update. It wasn't just corruption, it was a coup. I left without another word, jaw tight, heart pounding. The sun outside felt hotter than it should have been, the kind of heat that makes everything shimmer and twist. On the drive home, I stopped by the creek again. The water was lower than before, the banks dry and cracking. They'd diverted more of it upstream to feed the new homes. It made me sick. I could almost hear Pops's voice in the back of my head. "You can't own the water, Jake. You just borrow it. But take it from the wrong place, and the land remembers." When I got back to the house, I found Maggie waiting by the gate again, this time with 2 men in suits. She smiled that same fake smile. "Afternoon, Jake," she said. "These gentlemen are here to inspect your dam. Just routine procedure." "Routine procedure?" I said, stepping closer. "Under whose authority?" "Mine," she said simply. I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. "You don't have any authority here, Maggie. This isn't your neighborhood. This is my family's land." She tilted her head, pitying me like a schoolteacher talking to a child. Not for long. The 2 men followed her up the path toward the dam, pretending not to notice the anger burning off me. I stood there, watching them walk my land like it belonged to them, and something inside me hardened. They could have their fake inspections, their lies, their paperwork. But I had something stronger. Truth, patience, and time. They were building their little empire on sand, and I knew how to make sand move. That night, I sat at my desk surrounded by piles of evidence, maps, photos, recordings. The glow from my computer screen flickered across Pops's old medal that hung on the wall. I picked it up, felt its weight, the cold metal pressing into my palm. He'd fought his wars overseas. Mine was right here, and I wasn't about to lose. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again. It was faint, but it was coming. I looked out across the land, at the dam standing tall against the fading light, and whispered to myself, "Let it rain." Because this time, the storm wouldn't destroy. It would reveal. And when it did, Maggie. Thornwell was going to learn what happens when you steal from the kind of man who knows how to fight floods. You can build your empire on stolen dirt, but water always finds its way home. The courthouse smelled like dust and old secrets. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching the floating specks in the air, as if the whole building was suspended in time. I'd been coming here every day for a week now, my boots echoing through empty hallways lined with portraits of long-dead officials who probably made the same mistakes these new ones were making now, selling pieces of Texas to anyone with a fancy title and a fat check. That morning I had one goal, to find something that proved Maggie's empire was built on lies. I'd already seen the damage she'd done. Half the creek dried up, cattle from the neighboring farm dying of thirst, and that smug smile of hers plastered across every community progress billboard in town. She wasn't just corrupt, she was proud of it. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when I dropped a pile of forms in front of him. "Public records," I said, "everything you've got on the Willowbrook Homeowners Association and Thornwell Development Group." He gave me a look like I'd just asked for the crown jewels, But after I flashed my veteran's ID, his tone changed. "All right, sir. Might take a bit." He disappeared into the back room, leaving me with the ticking of a clock and the faint hum of an air conditioner that didn't work. While I waited, I looked around at the old filing cabinets and worn floors. Pops used to bring me here when I was a kid. He'd say, "This is where the truth sleeps, Jake, and every now and then, someone's got to wake it up." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now I did. When the clerk came back, he dropped 2 heavy boxes on the counter with a grunt. "Everything we've got from 1920 through 1980, but I warn you, it's a mess." Perfect. Messes are where the truth hides. I spent the next few hours digging through brittle papers and faded maps. Old deeds, zoning requests, permits. Most of it was just bureaucracy, signatures, stamps, initials. But then I found something strange. A thin, yellowed folder stamped with the seal of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. My pulse picked up. Inside were diagrams, blueprints of the Morrison Dam. At the bottom, in smudged ink, was my grandfather's signature. But that wasn't what stopped me. It was the letter stapled to it. Dated July 1978. Authorization for flood management infrastructure under federal jurisdiction. Federal jurisdiction. That phrase hit like lightning. It meant the Morrison Dam wasn't just a private structure, it was registered as part of a federal water control system. Any changes to it, any rerouting of its tributaries, required government approval. Maggie hadn't just violated property law, she'd violated federal water regulations. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of the courthouse fading as realization sank in. Pops knew what he was doing. He didn't just build a dam, he built a shield. A legal fortress strong enough to outlast him, maybe even outlast me. The next few pages confirmed it. Environmental impact assessments, water flow charts, even rainfall data handwritten in the margins. Pops had worked with the Corps to ensure the dam would remain protected, in perpetuity. And there it was again. That word. Forever. I could almost hear his voice. "If you build it right." "Jake, no one can take it away." When I flipped to the last document in the file, I froze. It was a land use map, stamped and signed in 1978, showing all designated water zones. The Morrison Creek, the reservoir, the dam, they were all marked in bright blue, labeled federally protected. Maggie's construction site, the tennis courts, the fancy homes, all of it sat right inside that blue zone. She hadn't just stolen my land. She'd built her kingdom on federal property. I grabbed my phone, took photos of everything, and drove straight home. The whole way there, I couldn't stop smiling. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile a soldier gets when he knows the enemy's about to walk into a trap. When I got home, I spread the papers out across the kitchen table. The sunlight hit them just right, the edges glowing like gold. I took out Pops's old notebook, the one I found hidden in his tool chest, and flipped to the last page. Scribbled there in pencil, faded but legible, were the words, "The law is like water. It flows to the lowest point of truth." I ran my fingers over the words, feeling the grooves of his handwriting. Pops had left me everything I needed, piece by piece. I just hadn't known how to see it until now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went down to the dam, flashlight in hand, papers tucked under my arm. The moon was high, reflecting off the water like molten silver. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. I stood there, looking at the structure my grandfather built, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was personal. This was legacy. I set the papers down on the railing and whispered, "You did good, Pops. You built it so they could never win." That's when I heard tires crunching on gravel behind me. I turned off my flashlight and crouched. A black SUV rolled up slowly, headlights dimmed. My gut tightened. It wasn't a neighbor. I recognized that car. It was the same one Maggie used during her HOA inspections. 2 figures stepped out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They walked toward the dam, talking in low voices. Rick says the council signed off already, one of them muttered. We just need to finish diverting the creek before inspection next week. My fists clenched. Rick Thornwell, Maggie's husband. Of course. The other man replied, What about Morrison? He's sniffing around again. Don't worry, the first one said with a smirk in his voice. He's just some ex-soldier. People like that always burn out before the paperwork clears. They laughed and walked closer to the spillway, their flashlights glinting off the metal. I stayed perfectly still, my back against the cold concrete. I could hear every word. Once this section's sealed off, they can't prove where the original water line was, one of them said. No creek, no case. That's when it hit me. They were trying to erase the evidence itself. I waited until they left, their SUV disappearing down the dirt road. Then I walked to the edge of the spillway, crouched, and shined my light down into the dark water below. I could see the new concrete barriers they'd started building, smooth, gray, and completely illegal. But now I had proof. Real proof. The next morning I scanned all the documents, uploaded them to cloud storage, and sent copies to two people. Tony Riggs, my old Army buddy at the EPA, and Amanda Cross, a local environmental lawyer known for taking on corrupt developers. I didn't know if they'd respond, but I couldn't wait anymore. Maggie was accelerating her plan, and I had to move faster. Tony replied first. Jake, he wrote, if what you found is real, she's cooked. Federal jurisdiction over water sources means any unauthorized alteration is a criminal offense. I'll verify the permits. Amanda's reply came a few hours later. Meet me tomorrow. Bring the files. And Jake, don't tell anyone you have them. That last line stuck with me. That night, I kept the files under Pops's old floorboard, the one under the kitchen cabinet where he used to hide spare cash. The rain came again, soft at first, then steady, then heavy. The sound against the tin roof felt almost rhythmic, like the land itself was breathing. I sat on the porch, watching the lightning flash in the distance, and thought about what I was about to do. This wasn't just about saving the land anymore. This was about exposing the rot underneath everything, the greed, the fraud, the arrogance. As the rain turned into a downpour, I looked out toward the dam, water streaming over its edge, glistening in the dark. I said quietly to myself, they think they're building a future. What they don't see is the storm coming for them, because now I had everything I needed. The documents, the proof, the allies, and soon everyone in Willowbrook was going to learn a hard truth. You can buy land. You can fake signatures. You can bury lies under concrete, but you can't outbuild the truth. The water always finds its way home, and when it does, it washes everything clean. The next morning started like any other. Quiet except for the steady hum of cicadas and the distant sound of a backhoe tearing up earth somewhere beyond the hill. But when I stepped outside, I saw something that stopped me cold. Bright orange stickers plastered across my gate, my mailbox, even my truck windshield. Big bold letters, notice of violation. Underneath, smaller text listing failure to comply with community code, unauthorized structure, and potential environmental hazard. I tore one off, my hands shaking. They were everywhere, dozens of them, fluttering in the wind like warnings. The HOA had gone from sneaky to open warfare. I took a deep breath and looked around. A white SUV was parked half a mile down the road, engine idling, two people inside pretending not to watch me. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. Maggie's people wanted me to know they were watching. I walked back into the house and grabbed my phone. The voicemail icon blinked red. 4 new messages. The first was a robotic voice from Willowbrook Compliance. The second was from a number I didn't recognize. But the third one froze me. It was my sister, Maya. Jake, they showed up at my school, she said, her voice trembling. A man said I signed off on something I never saw before. He told the principal I was under investigation for fraud. What the hell's going on? Call me back, please. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles went white. Maggie wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was going after family. The final voicemail was from a blocked number. It was short. A woman's voice, calm, controlled, and dripping with arrogance. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Jake. Let it go before someone gets hurt. Maggie. I didn't call her back. I didn't need to. I knew what she was doing. Pressure tactics. She wanted to break me down, isolate me, make me desperate. She didn't realize she was dealing with a man who'd been through real wars. I'd seen worse than her threats, but what she didn't expect was that I wasn't alone anymore. That afternoon, I called Tony. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you've got something," he said. "Oh, I've got more than something," I told him. "They've been tampering with a federally registered waterway. I've got video, signatures, and a trail of fake permits." Tony whistled low. "That's not just a zoning violation, Jake. That's environmental crime. If they moved water or altered flood patterns without clearance, that's a violation of the Clean Water Act. And if they forged signatures, insurance fraud. That's federal." I could almost hear him grinning on the other end. "You ready to make some people nervous?" "You have no idea," I said. Tony connected me to Amanda Cross, an environmental lawyer he'd worked with before. She was sharp, fast-talking, and sounded like she'd eaten a few HOA presidents for breakfast. "Send me everything," she said. "The deeds, the maps, the waterline data. I'll cross-check the permits and zoning history. If they filed fake reports with the state, we can get them under Title 18, false statements, wire fraud, conspiracy. Real criminal charges." By that night, we had a plan. I printed every document, highlighted every inconsistency, and laid it all out across the living room floor. Pops's old dam permits, the Army Corps files, Maggie's rezoning requests, all of it connected like veins feeding one rotten heart. And at the center of it was her signature. Fake, lazy, and confident. Maggie thought no one would ever look this deep, but I wasn't the same man she'd started this fight with. The next day, she escalated again. 3 men in matching security uniforms showed up at my property line. They wore sunglasses and carried clipboards, pretending to be inspectors. I walked out to meet them, filming on my phone. "You boys lost?" I asked. The tallest one cleared his throat. "Mr. Morrison, we're here on behalf of the Willowbrook HOA to conduct a safety inspection on the dam structure. We've received reports of instability and possible risk to the community." "Instability?" I said, smiling. "Funny. The only unstable thing around here is your boss." He frowned. "Sir, refusal to cooperate could result in penalties and enforcement action." I stepped closer until we were eye to eye. "This dam's under federal protection. You step 1 foot past that fence and I'll have the sheriff, the EPA, and the Army Corps of Engineers down here before you can spell HOA. The man hesitated, glanced at his buddies, and finally said, "We'll note your non-compliance." Then they left, driving off fast enough to spray gravel across my boots. I looked down at the dust cloud fading in the distance and muttered, "Yeah, go note that." That night, Amanda called with news. "Jake, it's worse than we thought," she said. The development company filed an environmental impact report claiming they had EPA clearance to reroute the creek. Except, get this, they used an approval number from a permit in Oklahoma. They didn't even bother changing the state code. So what does that mean? "It means," she said, "they committed federal fraud. And we can prove it." I sat back, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Then let's bring the storm." Over the next week, we built our case. Tony ran water analysis reports showing how Maggie's construction had caused contamination downstream. Chemicals, runoff, even traces of diesel. Amanda dug into insurance documents and found 2 fraudulent claims totaling over $400,000, filed under the HOA's name. And I compiled everything into a single drive labeled simply, "The Flood." Maggie must have sensed the pressure because the harassment hit a new level. One night, I came home to find my mailbox smashed and tire tracks leading back toward the subdivision. Another day, my internet went out mysteriously right after I uploaded evidence files. And every time I went into town, I'd see her car parked somewhere nearby, white, spotless, and waiting. But none of it scared me anymore. Every threat just proved we were winning. Then came the day that changed everything. Tony called. His voice was urgent. "Jake, listen carefully. I ran your dam through the Federal Infrastructure Registry. It's still active. That means any tampering isn't just a violation, it's interference with government property." I froze. "You're saying Maggie and her crew committed a federal crime?" "Exactly. Which means this isn't a civil case anymore. It's criminal. And the feds will take it from here. For a moment, the room felt lighter. I thought about Pops, about his hands building that dam stone by stone, about how he said the land would always remember. Maybe he'd been right. But before I could even celebrate, the phone buzzed again. Maya. Her voice was shaking. "Jake, you need to see this." She sent me a video. It was footage from her school parking lot. 3 men in vests talking to her boss, handing him papers. Then, the camera turned and caught one of them smiling at her car window. "Tell your brother to stop digging," he said. "He's in way over his head." That's when I realized Maggie wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. I called Amanda immediately. "We need to move," I said. "Now." "I'm already on it," she replied. "Tony's filing the environmental violation reports tonight. We're looping in the Department of Justice. But Jake, until we have official authorization, keep everything locked up. Don't confront them. Don't give them an excuse." I promised I wouldn't. But promises don't mean much when your blood's boiling. That night, I stood on the dam again. The storm clouds were gathering overhead, black and heavy. The wind howled through the trees, the air thick with electricity. It felt like the whole world was waiting for something to break. I looked out across the valley, at the new houses glowing in the dark, at the stolen water glinting like silver snakes under the floodlights. My jaw tightened. I could almost feel Pops beside me, silent, steady. "They think they own it all," I said softly. "Let's show them who really does." When I walked back to the house, I started writing a statement. Every detail, every violation, every act of intimidation. I wasn't just fighting for land anymore. I was fighting for everyone who'd ever been bullied by people hiding behind HOA letterheads and fake smiles. Before I went to bed, I uploaded one last video to a private server, a compilation of everything. The harassment, the illegal construction, the federal files, just in case anything happened to me. Then I turned off the lights and whispered into the darkness, "You want a war, Maggie? You've got one." Because this wasn't just about property or power anymore. This was about truth. And the thing about truth is, it doesn't care how many gates you build or rules you write. When the storm comes, it doesn't knock. It breaks through. And Maggie Thornwell was about to learn what it feels like to drown in her own lies. The sun was already sinking behind the ridge when I got the call that changed everything. Tony's voice came through the line, rough and urgent, like a man who'd been waiting for this moment all his life. "Jake," he said, "we've got green light. The feds are looking into it, but they need us to hold the line for 48 hours. Just 48. Can you do that? 48 hours. That's all I had to prove everything, to hold my ground before the city, the HOA, or anyone else tried to shut me down." I looked out at the dam, water glinting under the orange sky, and said, "You give me 2 days, I'll give you the truth." That night, I called the team together. Tony was already on the road from Dallas. Amanda said she'd be there by morning with legal filings. Miguel Santos, a local hydrologist I'd met during the investigation, offered to run field tests. And Mrs. Chen, one of the oldest residents of Willowbrook, said she'd testify. She'd seen the creek before the developers changed it, and she wasn't afraid to speak. We met in my grandfather's barn, same place Pops used to store his tools and keep his secrets. The wooden beams still smelled like oil and sweat. Rain tapped lightly against the tin roof as everyone gathered around the old table. Amanda spread out the maps and documents. "Here's what we're dealing with," she said. "The dam and creek are under federal protection. The HOA diverted water flow illegally. The EPA's got enough to freeze their assets, but we need evidence of current damage, something visual, undeniable." Miguel unrolled a satellite map. "Rain's coming," he said. "Big storm system moving in from the west. If we can record the water pattern during the storm, we'll have proof that the HOA altered the natural floodway. The water will show where it's supposed to go and where it can't anymore." Tony grinned. "Nature's about to testify for us." We all looked at the radar, swirling red and yellow bands crawling toward the valley. 2 days, maybe less, until it hit. I leaned forward, running my finger along the map. "We'll set up cameras here, here, and here. One at the dam, one at the diverted creek, one by the subdivision wall. When the rain comes, we'll have full coverage." Amanda nodded. You realize if the city tries to intervene before then, they'll call it vandalism or interference with municipal property. I smiled. Let them try. I've got Pop's federal paperwork. They touch this land, they're the ones committing a crime. The plan was risky, but simple. Collect evidence. Stay alive long enough to deliver it. That night, I walked the property alone, flashlight cutting through the dark. The air was heavy, charged, the calm before the storm. Every sound, the wind, the crickets, the rustle of grass, felt sharper, more deliberate. Like the land was awake, watching. I found myself standing by the dam again, my hand resting on the old lever Pops installed decades ago. The metal was cold, slick with dew. I could still see his fingerprints on the design, the way every bolt, every hinge had purpose. Pops didn't just build it to hold back water. He built it to give people time. Time to prepare. Time to think. Time to choose what kind of man you'd be when the storm finally came. And now here I was, standing where he once stood, staring down at the reflection of the coming thunder. I thought about what this fight had become. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about every person who'd been bullied into silence by someone richer, louder, or more powerful. It was about every veteran who came home to find that the country they fought for was being carved up by greed. As lightning flickered across the horizon, I whispered, "They don't know what's coming." By sunrise, the team was back in motion. Tony arrived with a truckload of sensors, tripods, and cameras. Miguel brought waterproof drones. Amanda had court orders prepped and ready to file the moment we had proof. Even Mrs. Chen showed up with a thermos of tea and a determination that could scare off a hurricane. Pops would have been proud, I told her. She smiled gently. He always said storms reveal people's hearts. Looks like we're about to find out who's who. We worked nonstop that day. Rain clouds gathered like bruises over the sky. The wind picked up, bending trees sideways. Every hour that passed, the air grew thicker, heavier. But the dam held firm, silent, and steady, like it was waiting for the fight. By late afternoon, the first drops fell. Slow, spaced apart, like the ticking of a clock counting down. The team scrambled to finish setup. Tony anchored the last tripod while Miguel calibrated the sensors. Amanda's laptop flickered with live feeds from the cameras. The data looked perfect. Then the phone rang. Amanda answered, face tightening. "It's city enforcement," she whispered. "They're sending an inspection team to shut us down. They claim we're interfering with community drainage." Tony cursed under his breath. "That's Maggie's doing. She's panicking." I grabbed my jacket. "Then let her panic. We heard engines before we saw them. 3 white trucks with city logos pulling up in a line. A man in a reflective vest got out, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind him, I saw Maggie's SUV parked half-hidden behind a cluster of trees. "Mr. Morrison," the inspector called. "We've received reports of unauthorized construction on municipal land. We're here to enforce compliance." I stepped forward, calm but firm. "This isn't municipal land. It's federally registered property under the Army Corps of Engineers." I handed him a printed copy of Pops's original permit. "You can verify it yourself." He looked it over, confused. I'll need to make some calls." "Go ahead," I said. "But do it fast. The storm's about to make your job a whole lot harder." Thunder cracked overhead like a cannon shot. The first wave of rain came crashing down, thick and relentless. The inspector hurried back to his truck, papers flapping. The rest of his crew followed. Maggie didn't move. She stood under her umbrella, eyes locked on me, jaw tight. She yelled over the storm, "You think this makes you a hero? You're just a squatter standing in the way of progress." I took a step closer, rain streaming down my face. "No, Maggie. I'm standing in the way of greed. Big difference." Her lips pressed into a thin line before she turned and got into her car, tires spinning mud as she sped off. By the time night fell, the rain was pounding so hard it sounded like 1,000 drums. Water rushed through the dam's spillways, roaring louder than I'd ever heard. The team huddled in the control shed, eyes glued to the monitors. The creek's natural flow had reemerged, cutting around Maggie's fake channels, ripping through the plastic barriers they'd built. Miguel shouted over the noise, "You're seeing this, right? The water's rejecting the diversion. It's carving its original path." Amanda's fingers flew across the keyboard. Recording everything. This is proof. Tony looked at me. If we can hold out till dawn, we'll have enough data to bury them. But the power flickered. Once, twice. Then darkness swallowed the shed. I grabbed a flashlight, heart racing. Backup generator! Tony ran outside into the downpour, mud splashing around his boots. I followed, holding the light steady. The rain stung like glass, the wind howling through the trees. We reached the generator just as it sputtered, coughing smoke. Tony hit the switch, and the lights snapped back on. Through the rain, I saw something moving near the dam. Headlights, a truck, Maggie's people. Are you kidding me? Amanda yelled from the doorway. They're trying to block the spillway. I ran toward them, slipping through the mud, shouting over the storm. Get off my land! One of the men tried to yell something back, but the thunder drowned him out. I reached for the truck door and ripped it open. You're about to cause a flood, you idiots. You think you can stop a dam with pickup trucks? The man froze, realizing the danger too late. Water was already surging around the tires. Tony appeared beside me. Jake, we've got to open the secondary spillway or the pressure will blow. I nodded, sprinting to the lever. It was rusted, stiff, but I pulled with everything I had. The mechanism groaned, then shifted. The gate dropped. The sound that followed was primal, a deep, earth-shaking roar as thousands of gallons of water surged through the secondary channel, rushing down into the valley where it belonged. The truck was swept aside, tumbling like a toy into the flood. The men scrambled for higher ground, shouting, panicked but alive. The storm raged for another hour before it began to fade. When it finally ended, the world was quiet again, except for the steady rush of water returning to the old creek bed. We stood there, soaked and shivering, staring at the valley below. The subdivision looked small now, fragile. The creek ran true again, carving its rightful path through the land. Amanda exhaled. You did it! We all did, Tony clapped me on the shoulder. Nature just filed your lawsuit for you. I looked at the dam, at the rising dawn painting the sky pink and gold. Pops built it to protect this land, I said quietly. Guess it still knows how. The team packed up as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. Drones hovered overhead, capturing footage of the restored flow, the collapsed barriers, the truth laid bare in the mud. I stood alone for a moment, watching the water shimmer in the new light. The storm was over, but the real fight was just beginning. Because now, I had everything, the evidence, the witnesses, the truth, and soon, Maggie Thornwell was going to learn the one thing every tyrant learns too late. You can build walls. You can fake documents. You can lie to the world, but when the water decides to move, nothing can stop it. The morning after the storm felt unreal, like the world had been scrubbed clean but left humming with leftover tension. The air was thick with the smell of wet dirt and cedar, that familiar Texas perfume after heavy rain. I stood by the dam, boots sinking into mud, staring at the valley below. The creek flowed true again, winding along its ancient path, cutting through the mess Maggie's developers had made. The water sparkled in the early light like it was alive, proud, free. For a few seconds, I just breathed. It was over. At least that's what I thought. But in every war, the enemy never accepts defeat right away. They always make one last desperate move. And Maggie Thornwell wasn't the kind of woman who went quietly. By noon, her lawyers had already filed an emergency injunction claiming I endangered community safety by tampering with the dam. Her statement to the media made me out to be a lunatic, some ex-soldier with a grudge, unstable, violent. She told reporters I'd nearly flooded the entire neighborhood. She left out the part where her own men tried to block a federal spillway in the middle of a thunderstorm. Within hours, news vans were lining the dirt road outside my property. Drones buzzed overhead, cameras pointed toward the dam. The story had gone viral. Veteran versus HOA President, Texas Land War. I should have been angry. Instead, I smiled. Let them watch. The truth was on my side. Tony was the first to arrive that morning, followed by Amanda and Miguel. They'd barely slept, but you wouldn't know it. Tony slapped a newspaper down on my porch table. You made the front page, brother. The man who flooded the HOA. I laughed quietly. They're not entirely wrong. Amanda rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her grin. The federal team's on their way. They've seen the footage, the rainfall data, the water flow models. Everything matches. The HOA's construction caused the blockage. You just released what was already building pressure. Miguel looked out at the dam and nodded. And because of that, you saved half the valley from washing away. They'll figure it out soon enough. That's when we heard engines again. But this time, it wasn't city inspectors or Maggie's cronies. It was the HOA board. 6 SUVs rolled up in formation like a miniature convoy, all spotless and black except one. Maggie's white Lexus at the center, gleaming like a pearl in the mud. She stepped out wearing heels and a designer raincoat, holding her phone like a weapon. Behind her, Rick Thornwell followed, trying to look in control but failing miserably. Reporters swarmed around her. She loved it. She stood there chin high, talking over their questions. "This man is dangerous," she said, pointing toward me. "He's put families at risk. He's tampered with private infrastructure, an act of vandalism and terror." "Terror," I repeated under my breath, almost laughing. Amanda whispered, "Don't take the bait. Let the cameras roll." So I did. I walked up slowly, calm, steady, letting the rain-slicked ground squish under my boots. When I stopped, the only sounds were camera shutters clicking and the creek roaring behind me. "Maggie," I said, "you should probably stop talking. The more you say, the deeper you dig your hole," she sneered. "You think you can intimidate me with your little army stories? This community will never forgive you for what you've done." I smiled. "I don't need their forgiveness. I've got the truth, and a federal water permit older than your HOA. Her smile faltered just for a second. I saw fear flicker behind those sharp, polished eyes. Then she tried to recover. "You think this paper trail saves you? You broke the law." I looked straight into the nearest camera and said, "Actually, ma'am, you did." That line hit like thunder. Even the reporters went quiet. I motioned to Amanda, who handed over a thick folder. "These," I said, "are copies of falsified construction permits signed under your name and your husband's. This one," I flipped to a page and held it up, "shows the zoning approval for your so-called community upgrade. Problem is, it's dated 2 months before the city council even voted on it. That's not a mistake. That's forgery." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maggie's face went pale. Rick stepped forward, stammering, You can't prove?" Tony cut him off, holding up a tablet showing the live satellite feed. "We already did. The storm exposed everything. The water followed the original creek path perfectly. The HOA's illegal drainage caused the flooding on their own land. You can't argue with gravity." The cameras zoomed in. Reporters whispered. Maggie's lips trembled as she turned to Rick, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. I took a step closer and said quietly, so only she could hear, "You built your house on stolen water. Now it's coming for you." Right then, sirens wailed in the distance. Police cruisers and 2 black SUVs rolled up, lights flashing. The crowd parted as uniformed federal agents stepped out. The lead officer called out, "Margaret Thornwell? Richard Thornwell? You're under federal investigation for environmental fraud, water misappropriation, and forgery of government documents." Maggie's composure shattered. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The agent didn't blink. "Yes, ma'am. And that's exactly why we're here." As they read her rights, she tried to keep up appearances, shouting about illegal recordings and fabricated evidence. But no one believed her anymore. Not after the footage of the dam hit national news that morning, showing her contractors blocking the spillway hours before the flood. The internet had already decided Maggie Thornwell wasn't a protector of the community. She was its parasite. Rick tried to slip away quietly, but Tony caught him by the arm. "Going somewhere, Councilman?" The cops weren't far behind. They cuffed him, too. The reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "Jake, how does it feel to win?" Someone yelled. I looked out over the water, still rushing steady and strong, and said, "It's not about winning. It's about restoring what was stolen." Then I turned to the nearest camera and added, "If you ever fight an HOA that thinks they're above the law, remember this. You can't stop nature, and you can't bury the truth." That line hit the internet like wildfire. Within hours, clips of the showdown went viral. Veteran outsmarts HOA tyrant. Texas man destroys corrupt board live. People from across the country started commenting, sharing their own stories of HOAs gone too far. It wasn't just a victory. It was a movement. Later that afternoon, I stood alone by the dam again. The chaos had faded, replaced by quiet and the hum of cicadas returning after the storm. The water level had evened out, smooth and calm. It looked like it was resting, too. Amanda walked up beside me, hands in her jacket pockets. "The Department of Justice is taking over the case," she said. "You won't have to deal with the Thornwells again." "Good," I said softly. "Let the system handle them," she smiled. "You know, you could have walked away from this at any point. Most people would have sold out or given up." I shrugged. It wasn't about me. It was about Pops, about everyone who ever built something honest and watched someone else try to steal it. We stood in silence for a while. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of wet grass and clay. Then Amanda said, "You realize your story's going to be in every news outlet by tomorrow. You'll probably get a book deal or a documentary." I laughed. "Nah, I just want the land to heal." As she walked back toward her car, I stayed by the dam, watching the creek shimmer in the setting sun. The sky was streaked with red and gold, the kind of sunset Pops used to call God's handshake. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. That's when I heard a faint voice behind me, Mrs. Chen. She'd come quietly, holding an umbrella even though the rain had stopped. "You did it, Jake," she said. "You brought the water home." I smiled at her, my throat tightening a little. "No, ma'am." "The water did it. It just needed a little help." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Your grandfather would be proud. He always said the dam wasn't built to hold water. It was built to hold truth. Truth doesn't drown." I looked out one last time at the creek carving through the valley, sunlight dancing on its ripples, and I realized she was right. For years, they'd tried to bury that truth under asphalt and greed. They tried to choke it with lies and paperwork. But truth is like water. It bends, it flows, it finds a way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered, "It's over, Pops. We did it." The dam stood silent and strong, a monument not just to my grandfather's hands, but to his faith, in people, in land, in the power of doing what's right, even when no one's watching. And though I didn't know it yet, that video, me standing there soaked in mud, saying you can't stop nature or federal law, would become the clip that changed everything, because sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or paperwork. Sometimes it comes from a storm, a camera, and a man who refuses to back down. That day, the Morrison Dam didn't just hold water. It held a story. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. The kind of cold that wasn't just about the air conditioning, it was the kind that lived in the walls, in the silence between footsteps. Reporters filled the hallways, cameras flashing like lightning every time a door opened. I'd been in firefights quieter than that place. Still, I kept my head down, papers in hand. Boots echoing across marble floors that probably hadn't seen real justice in years. They called it The People versus Thornwell and Associates. But to me, it was simpler than that. It was Maggie Thornwell versus the truth, and the truth was about to walk right into that courtroom with me. Amanda led the way, calm and razor-sharp as ever. "Remember," she whispered, "we don't need theatrics. We just show them the facts. Let the evidence speak." I nodded. I wasn't here to make speeches. I was here to finish what Pop started. The double doors swung open, and there she was, Maggie Thornwell, sitting at the defendant's table in a tailored gray suit, her hands folded, face perfectly composed, like a woman auditioning for a role she no longer believed she could win. Her husband, Rick, sat beside her, pale and sweaty, trying to pretend the cameras weren't eating him alive. When she looked up and saw me, her expression didn't flicker. But I could see it in her eyes, the recognition that the storm she'd started had finally caught up to her. The judge entered, gavel striking once. Court is now in session. And just like that, the reckoning began. The prosecution went first. They started slow, laying the foundation, introducing exhibits, the chain of custody for every piece of evidence we'd collected. It felt methodical, clinical. but every word landed like a hammer. Photos of the diverted creek, maps of the illegal drainage system, satellite images showing construction inside protected zones. Then came the documents, the ones Tony and I dug up from the courthouse basement. The forged signatures, the fake environmental reports, the zoning requests, dated months before the votes took place. Each page was another nail in Maggie's coffin. Amanda leaned over to me and whispered, "They're cooked." But I didn't smile. Not yet. Because I'd seen people like Maggie wriggle out of tighter traps before. When it was her turn to testify, she stood with that same icy confidence she'd worn since the first day we met. Her lawyer walked her through a performance meant to win sympathy. She talked about community improvement, public safety, and unfortunate misunderstandings. She painted herself as the victim, just a woman trying to make her neighborhood better, but lies have weight. And by the time she reached the end of her speech, even her voice sounded tired from carrying them. That's when Amanda stood. "Mrs. Thornwell," she began, voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You claim your actions were in the interest of community safety. Yet, according to the Clean Water Act, Section 404, you diverted a federally protected waterway without authorization. Do you deny this?" Maggie hesitated. I was told the permits were valid." Amanda smiled faintly. "By whom? Your husband? Or the developer whose company you secretly owned 51% of?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Cameras clicked. The judge pounded the gavel. Maggie's face flushed crimson. Amanda pressed on. "Mrs. Thornwell, you didn't protect your community. You exploited it. You falsified documents, intimidated residents, and when you were caught, you blamed everyone but yourself. Tell me, how does that improve safety?" Maggie opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Just silence. And that silence said everything. When Amanda was done, the prosecution called their final witnesses. Miguel took the stand first, explaining in simple, steady words how the diverted creek caused erosion, contamination, and property damage that would take years to repair. Then Tony testified, walking the court through the federal protections that Maggie's development violated. And then it was my turn. The bailiff swore me in, and I took the stand. For a moment, the room went still. Every camera, every eye turned toward me. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, but I didn't care. "I'm not here to talk about laws or politics," I said. "I'm here because this land meant something to my family. My grandfather built that dam to keep his neighbors alive during the drought of '78. He didn't ask for payment or praise. He did it because he believed water belongs to everyone, not to a developer, not to a board, to everyone." I paused, looking at Maggie. "When I came home from deployment, I found fences cutting through our pasture, a tennis court where my cattle used to graze, and a woman telling me it was for safety. But safety doesn't come from greed. It comes from stewardship, from protecting what you've been trusted with." You could hear the hum of the lights above us. No one moved, so no, I continued. I didn't flood their homes. I freed the creek. I gave the land back its voice. The judge watched me carefully, and for a second, I thought I saw something like understanding flicker across his face. When I stepped down, the courtroom was quiet. No whispers, no movement. Just the sound of the truth settling where it needed to be. The closing arguments were short. Amanda laid it out plain. Maggie's HOA wasn't a community organization. It was a front for illegal land grabs, falsified permits, and environmental destruction. And when she was caught, she tried to frame the man who exposed her. The defense tried to spin it, of course. They called me reckless, a vigilante, said I'd endangered lives. But when the judge reviewed the evidence, the timestamps, the federal stamps, the eyewitness accounts, it was over before it began. The jury took only 3 hours. When they filed back into the room, the air was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. The foreman stood, hands trembling slightly as he read the verdict. On the charges of environmental fraud, wire fraud, and forgery of government documents, we find the defendants guilty. Maggie's mask shattered. She let out a choked breath, eyes darting wildly between her lawyer and the judge. Rick slumped back in his seat, face as white as the paper in front of him. The gavel came down. Sentence, 8 years, no parole. $600,000 in restitution to the community fund. The reporters went wild. Cameras flashed. But I just sat there, staring at the floor, feeling something heavy and strange, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and sadness. Justice isn't clean. It doesn't erase what was lost. It just gives the world a chance to breathe again. After court adjourned, people clapped me on the shoulder, shook my hand, thanked me for standing up. I smiled, but my mind was somewhere else, back at the dam, back with Pops. That evening, I drove home through the long stretch of county road, the sun bleeding orange across the sky. The storm damage had already begun to heal. The creek ran strong and steady beside me, cutting through the valley like it had reclaimed its purpose. When I reached the ranch, the air was still. The smell of rain still lingered in the dirt. I parked near the dam and got out. The water shimmered gold under the dying light. I could almost hear Pops's laugh in the wind. I walked down to the edge, crouched by the spillway, and touched the water. It was cool, alive. I said softly, "It's done, Pops, we did it. They can't take it anymore." Somewhere behind me, a car door shut. I turned and saw Maya walking toward me, her face glowing with pride. "You actually did it," she said. "You beat them," I smiled. "We beat them. Couldn't have done it alone." She looked out over the valley, eyes shining. "You know, people are already talking about starting a movement, HOA reform, environmental rights. They're calling it the Willowbrook Initiative." I laughed quietly. "Guess the water's still moving, huh?" She smiled. "Always will." As the sun slipped below the horizon, the valley came alive with sound again, the creek whispering, frogs croaking, crickets singing their victory song. The world was breathing easy, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. Later that night, I stood on the porch, looking out at the lights reflecting off the dam. Amanda had sent a message. The DOJ was opening an investigation into several other HOAs across the state. It had started here with one man, one dam, and a storm. But now it was spreading. I took a deep breath, the night air cool against my skin, and whispered, "Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek, because that's what Pops had always believed, that real justice doesn't come from punishment. It comes from restoration, from setting things back where they belong." The land was whole again. The water was free, and as I stood there, the wind carrying the sound of the flowing creek across the dark, I realized that even though Pops was gone, his promise still lived here, in the dirt, in the water, in every drop that refused to be controlled. Justice had found its way home, and so had I.